Hey guys, I usually do this for Vainglory, but I decided because I've started playing and casting a lot more League of Legends recently, I'd start doing some League of Legends video content too. And with 9.9 just having been released, I'm going to do a patch rundown. I do a patch rundown for Vainglory, but I'm going to do it for League of Legends too. For those of you that don't know, I'm actually not an awful League of Legends player. I'm currently Diamond 4 with 29 wins and 8 losses, and trying to climb a little bit throughout this season. I also do quite a lot of League of Legends casting. I did a lot before I joined Vainglory, and I just finished the European Masters 2019 broadcast. So kind of quite active in League of Legends. So hopefully you guys enjoy this, and I can get on with more League of Legends. Okay, where do we begin with 9.9? Because there is quite a lot of changes, and quite some significant changes to champions too. Kind of want to start with Aatrox. Now, they've basically tried to take the power away from Aatrox's Q and his ult, and redistribute it in a way that's going to make him more of a brawler. I think they're trying to make him more of a true bruiser, rather than literally someone who dives into a team fight, uses his Q a couple of times and hopes that you get some knockups and some one-shots, which I think is arguably what they wanted to achieve with Aatrox in the first place, but we just found himself in this place with the itemization where you could just hit really heavy hitting Qs in the late game, and then when you got to the late game, if you weren't hitting those Qs in team fights, you were just kind of next to useless. So they've reduced his overall health regeneration by quite a significant margin, over 50%, which is essentially allowing them to put a bit more healing based in his kit. It does mean you need to be aggressive, it does mean you need to sort of take those trades, but I think we'll go through the skills and we'll talk about it overall. We'll start with passive. So he no longer reduces healing and shielding on champions. That was a nice addition, but I don't think it was like the be-all and end-all of his passive. But what they have changed is the empowered basic attack that he gets. Now, they've changed it to do less percentage target maximum health, but they've reduced the cooldown by 10 seconds. And most notably, instead of relying on ability casts and champions hit with the edge of the Darken Blade, you now get that cooldown reduced by attack or ability hit on any enemy champions and large monsters, so that makes his jungle clear pretty good too, and per champion hit with the edge of the Darken Blade. So if you are hitting them with the edge of the Darken Blade, you're getting a 4-second reduction. So if you hit them with the edge of the Darken Blade in a full combo, you can essentially reduce that cooldown to 3 seconds. A single basic attack will make it 1 second, and you're going to be able to get this empowered basic attack more often, and it is also going to give you the healing back to you as well. So you're going to get the healing back onto you by using this ability. This is where the majority of Aatrox's healing is going to come from. We're also going to look at some of the other abilities and talk about them too. So the Darken Blade, after Q3 cast or after the Q window cast expires. So what this means is that the cooldown in the early game is going to be significantly longer in the most part, because usually what happens when you start casting your Q, that 16-second cooldown at level 1 starts to tick down, and then by the time that you've cast all 3 Qs, especially if you're just waiting in between each cast, it will come off cooldown pretty quickly. Now in the early game, you're going to have a longer cooldown. You're going to get 3 Qs and then 14 seconds between them. So that means you're not going to have that trading power that you had in the very early levels, and it kind of hurts the earlier levels on Aatrox, especially if you're not landing every single one of your Qs, because they've buffed the damage to try and compensate. They've given you a bit more damage to try and compensate. In the late game, however, it's down to 6 seconds, which actually means you're going to get it off cooldown fairly frequently, and you'll probably find it comes off cooldown ever so slightly quicker than it used to when you previously had it at 12 seconds. So the Darken Blade is going to scale up a bit better in terms of usability. However, it has kind of cut Aatrox's early laning power. Infernal Chains, it is 25% slower at all ranks instead of scaling. However, the cooldown is significantly increased until you hit the final level, where it is identical. It is about 8 seconds longer, level 1. You're never going to level the Infernal Chains over the Umbral Dash, so it's always going to be leveled last. So you're going to find that this is going to be on long cooldown for the majority of the game. It just means you need to be a bit more selective about the time that you use it. You can't just spam it in lane. Not that you did anyway, for the most part, but it just means you're going to have to be a bit more selective. Umbral Dash, you no longer get the bonus attack damage when you use it, so you can't jump in, use the empowered basic attack, and get the extra attack damage. I guess a little bit of that has been offset by putting damage onto the Darken Blade, also the fact that you're going to get your passive off cooldown more quickly. However, they've changed the heal trigger. Instead of just physical damage versus champions, it is any damage versus champions except for periodic damage. So things like Sunfire Cape is not going to heal you. You can't just go buy Sunfire Cape on Aatrox and stand next to someone and start healing up for a percentage of that Sunfire Cape damage. I don't think this changes too much, because I think there is limited magic damage coming out of Aatrox's kit, but it just means that you can just sort of jump in and you can, anything that you land is going to give you a percentage of healing, and that's perfectly fine. Overall, I'd say it's a slight nerf to Umbral Dash, because realistically, Aatrox wasn't dealing much non-physical damage in the first place, and they've literally just removed the attack damage bonus that you get when using it. So again, a lot of it going into the passive and the power in the passive, which we talked about previously. So this is the big change, World Ender. Taking lethal damage no longer revives Aatrox over 3.25 seconds unless takedowns extend World Ender by 5 seconds, refreshing its movement speed and allowing Aatrox to revive upon taking lethal damage. They removed the flat movement speed and gave it decaying movement speed, and it also no longer clears temporary debuffs. But that does mean it's both a positive and a negative, so you're going to still have Conqueror, for instance. Conqueror Aatrox will now be good because you'll have to be able to proc Conqueror, pop the ultimate, and still have those Conqueror stacks going. Aatrox also receives increased healing during World Ender, so you should be able to, with maxed E, passive, you're going to get massively increased healing during World Ender. You're also going to find that the cooldown is much, much quicker because it actually goes on cooldown on cast as opposed to when it ends, and the cooldown has also been reduced a significant amount. The only other change that you might find is a slight nerf is that the slow during revive is down to 99%, so you become incredibly slow when you're reviving, which means you have to be so selective about your positioning. And Aatrox's maximum health is 30% at all ranks. It makes it slightly better in the early game, but is going to be well, it doesn't matter. They're based on the blood well, so it's basically going to be 30% all ranks. You don't have to build that blood well to get the huge revive off. You're just going to get a 30% in the middle the entire time. So what does this mean for Aatrox? Essentially, no longer can you max Q, build flat damage, dive into a team fight, assume that your ultimate is going to save you if things go wrong. There is a lot more basic attack focus, a lot more refreshing that basic attack focus, which means you're probably going to find that the builds maybe start to include a bit of attack speed. So something like Blade of the Ruined King, you are going to be more basic attack focused. You can no longer just spam abilities in lane. I reckon we could see things like Black Cleaver, which I still think is going to be a fine item on him, into something like Blade of the Ruined King, which is maybe the 2-item spike that Aatrox is going to go for here, because it gives him both the damage on his Q as well as the cooldown reduction, which is obviously incredibly helpful, but also because we're now seeing more basic attack focus, because that's going to reset your passive, a little bit of attack speed is never going to go awry. You're also going to get an extra bit of healing from the Blade of the Ruined King proc as well, because that's going to heal you and then heal you again because you're going to dealing damage to the enemy champion, and that's going to give you extra healing based on Aatrox. So I think you're going to find he's a little bit weaker in the early game. I think he scales better. I think his dueling potential is going to be better as the game goes on. You probably need some attack speed in Aatrox's kit to really utilize the power of that passive. But overall, if you're a skilled player, I think you might end up finding Aatrox is a little bit more rewarding. Unsure if he's better or not yet, because the playstyle's completely changed, but I just think that people who were kind of ability spammers on Aatrox, and I think Last Shadow said the same thing, are probably not going to find that they are getting the same love that they used to with this champion. So that's my thoughts. I think there might be some attack speed kind of builds that can come in here. You might even find Triforce comes through, simply because you have a ways to proc the Sheen. You might even see Triforce Aatrox. That could be really interesting. I'm very much looking forward to seeing any sort of adapted builds that we get, because the attack speed is fairly useful to him now. Let's have a look at Blitzcrank. Basically had a VFX upgrade. I'm not going to go over the VFX upgrades because it's like more sparky. They have updated the rocket grab hitbox to be more, I guess, representative of the actual width of the hook. So that might help you with dodging. It also might help you with knowing exactly where it's going to hit. So that's a kind of a change for people who are having to deal with Blitzcrank more than anything. 30% of Blitzcrank's maximum mana is actually a pretty big buff, because if you're building any mana on Blitzcrank, you don't have to worry about how much mana you've used. It's always going to be based on the overall mana that you've got. So that's an interesting change here. Also, they've changed his ultimate. So instead of getting the random arcs of lightning, so I don't know if you remember that Blitzcrank's ultimate, when it was off cooldown, basically used to just hit random people with lightning. Basically now, Blitzcrank has a bit more choice about what he can do when that ultimate is off cooldown. He can mark his targets hit by his basic attack, so you can pull them in and then hit them, and they're going to take a sort of a bonus piece of magic damage after a second delay. I don't know what the internal cooldown is on this. It hasn't shown, but I'm assuming there's going to be a slight internal cooldown. Otherwise, you're just going to be literally pumping out 150 damage on 1 second delays over and over again. But it basically means that Blitzcrank can be a bit more burst orientated on a target that he wants, which is why they've cut the overall damage, because it just means that he's going to be able to target someone specifically when it comes to using his ultimate. But overall, I wouldn't say any crazy changes to Blitzcrank. I think it'll probably make Blitzcrank ever so slightly more viable, but other than that, it's not too huge changes. See, these are the Recon changes. So I don't know if you know, but they were talking about Recon changes, and essentially they were looking at removing his ability to use his W and flash during the quickness. Essentially, they've buffed him quite considerably in terms of base stats. So his early laning phase is going to be... Well, they've buffed his armor and his health. His attack damage has gone down, his magic resistance has gone up, and his magic resistance growth has gone up. So he's not going to have as much attack damage, but his overall defensive stats, making him a bit more tanky in the lane, they have gone up. They've also increased the grand entrance dash speed by quite a significant margin. 200 dash speed is pretty solid, so that's actually going to make his engage potential outside of his ultimate really good. The trade-off is that he can no longer cast grand entrance or flash during the verse at 0.5 seconds of the quickness. However, I don't think that'll affect him for the majority of players. In fact, overall, the majority of players are probably going to find that the Recon plays a bit more nicely for them, because you can use Grand Entrance, you can use the quickness, ramp it up just a little bit, then use Grand Entrance with the increased dash speed, and you're still probably covering the same distance that you would have done during that 0.5 seconds. The flash is the big one, though. That's probably going to affect people in pro play more consistently. You might need to find a quickness coming out of vision, or you're going to have to find an engage with your grand entrance and then use the quickness directly afterwards once you've already used that, and then flash if you need to following that. It's going to affect the really clutch plays, but the majority of people will probably find that Recon plays a bit better for them, as well as the fact that his laning phase is going to get slightly better. Don't know why they nerfed his attack damage, but I'm guessing that's because he's going to be a bit tankier and can take a bit in return. But overall, his engage potential is going to be slightly better with the increased dash speed in the laning phase. So those matchups that Recon was good into, if you can just engage level 1 into some particularly squishy supports, you might find that you get those engages off more consistently. Okay, so let's take a quick look at Soraka. Soraka's had some what they call significant changes here. And what they're doing is essentially trying to remove the Emax build. Now, the Emax build, in my opinion, was fairly niche for a lot of particular matchups. I think it was good into matchups like Morgana, for instance. But they're kind of trying to remove that. What they're doing instead is they're changing her abilities. Let's have a look at Starcool first. So they're actually making Starcool a higher cooldown at earlier levels. They're buffing the heal, and they're buffing the rejuvenation ally heal too. So if you hit your Starcool, the initial ticks also tick more than the later ticks. You're going to get slightly increased burst healing because it's now over 5 seconds. And I'm guessing that's going to affect you and get some more healing up front. The damage is going to be nerfed, as well as the no changes to the ability power ratio. The movement speed is going to be a decaying movement speed buff, so it doesn't matter where you're moving, you're going to get a movement speed buff from it regardless. Which is interesting. I think they're trying to give power over to the QW in terms of just trying to make sure that you're supporting your ally. Little change to Astral Infusion, where it's going to increase the maximum health threshold. They are actually reducing the cooldown of Equinox in the early game. But they're buffing the mana cost as it scales. Sorry, nerfing the mana cost as it's going to scale. The damage is the important part. They're actually cutting the damage by up to 60 in the late game, but not changing the ability power scaling ratios. It's going to still be the same in the first levels, but to be completely frank with you, 60 damage, given that you don't really build any kind of scaling AP or much scaling AP on the Soraka, is going to sort of significantly affect the amount of damage that you're going to do. They're essentially trying to make Soraka more supportive. The problem with making Soraka more supportive, and also kind of nerfing the damage on her Q as well, is that Soraka is so vulnerable to so many supports right now in the meta. Like, she's just really vulnerable to quite a few supports. And the way that she kind of fought back was by maxing E or having that sort of big hitting Starcool so that you could actually be a bit more of an aggressive support. The problem is by relying on your AD carry, it makes Soraka a kind of take the power out of your own hands type of champion. I mean, yeah, of course you can heal your AD carry, but not every AD carry in the world is good. And so this kind of makes, if people want to pick Soraka, you're kind of limiting the kind of overall impact that you can have in the lane yourself in terms of zoning potential and in terms of taking control of the game, because, you know, essentially to get the same cooldown on your star call, you're going to have 4 points in it, which you aren't going to get for quite some time. I mean, before level 6, what the maximum you're going to get is down to 6 seconds, right? They're nerfing the damage overall. And that means she's going to be much, much more vulnerable to the likes of Morgana or whatever, because she doesn't really have the power to trade back. So I think, yeah, okay, it's great that the kind of the rejuvenation has been buffed here, but like even in a lot of scenarios, it is quite difficult to land star call effectively. A lot of people are quite good at dodging it, and a lot of people can kind of get out of that. So I think this is overall, in my opinion, a nerf to Soraka in terms of her overall playstyle, or at least the easiest playstyle to play Soraka. Like, you can still play Healbot Soraka, and I guess if you're playing Healbot Soraka, you're still doing fine. But it just feels like a little bit rough, because Emax Soraka was, I guess, quite difficult to play against for people, but also Emax Soraka was a way to fight back against bad lane matchups. So yeah, it's some pretty significant changes there. Not sure how I feel about them overall. I think Soraka was still not exactly a super high level pick. Soraka was kind of a niche picking pro play for kind of specific matchups. Probably going to lose her position in those specific matchups now. Maybe across the general level of play, Soraka will see a bit more play, because most people probably in the sort of the middle to low elos played her more as a heal bot anyway. Not many people played that Emax. But yeah, it's just going to cut that kind of. It's going to cut that ability to get the free damage down, which I suppose is annoying. I mean, free damage is always annoying, but yeah, I mean, I think it's going to make Soraka a bit worse in the matchups that she's already pretty bad in. Let's have a look at Tahm Kench. So his base stats have gone up, including health growth down, and his movement speed has gone up. But he has had some significant changes to his abilities. 1.5% of Tahm Kench's maximum health at all levels, so it's not going to scale up to 1.75%, but it is going to be a little bit more hard-hitting in the early game. Tongue Lash, cooldown is up, but scales down when you max it. The slow duration has gone up, as well as the slow percentage and tongue range. So they're actually loading a bit of power onto the Q for Tahm Kench. But this is the major changes. Obviously, they really wanted to deal with his Devour. When he eats an ally, he slows and grounds Tahm Kench by 95%. Obviously, to try and compensate, they've changed the early cooldown. They've also decreased the minion base spit damage, but they've also kind of offloaded percentage health damage to flat damage on his Devour when he's devouring an enemy. The problem with this is that was all Tahm Kench was good for. Like, honestly, this was so okay. What you can do, obviously, with Tahm Kench in this situation is you can use it to help avoid CC, but then your ally is relying, or your AD carry or whoever you're devouring are relying on their own movement abilities to get themselves out of harm's way. No longer can you save your AD carry and run away with them. You are now essentially become a sitting duck. So if you devour your selected target in a team fight, you yourself are now a massive sitting duck. And because your ally is inside, they are also a massive sitting duck. Also, if you're playing with a Tahm Kench and they don't spit you out immediately in danger, you're both just dead. In the laning phase, forget about using this ability to avoid your AD carry taking damage in trades, because you're just going to get killed. Matchups that Tahm Kench was pretty bad into, he's just become significantly worse. Like Braum is going to eat Tahm Kench alive in lane. This is such a significant nerf that I genuinely don't know if we will see Tahm Kench in play, like at least high level play, because they said they sort of rekindled some of his kit elsewhere, and I guess in the late game the scaling on his Abyssal Voyage is nice, but it has been nerfed pretty hard in the early game, and I guess they've overall increased his thick skin so that he can get himself a guaranteed beefy barrier. But I mean, the nerfs to his W are so significant, because that's the only reason anyone picked Tahm Kench, that I just don't see him getting played. I just can't see a situation where rooting yourself to the floor is useful when you're trying to save an ally, or you're trying to get an ally out of a situation in a trade. You can no longer just devour your ally when a gank is happening, because you both just die. You devour your ally in most scenarios now, you're just making both of you more vulnerable. I think these are some pretty significant changes to Tahm Kench, which is going to really kind of, in my opinion, ruin him for the most part in terms of what he can do. Let's have a look. Akali basically nerfed to her Twilight Shroud duration in terms of cooldown, so she's going to have cooldown in the early game increased, as well as the fact that the extended duration when breaking invisibility is going to go down to 2 seconds. So I think, yeah, Twilight Shroud's a really obnoxious ability to play against, and I think that's perfectly fine to make those changes. Darius is getting a buff to his Q in terms of healing on percentage of his missing health, and also the overall flat damage as well. He gets only 10, but it's still a buff to his flat damage. I mean, Darius was in an okay position. His team fighting has never been like his ultimate strength, unless he's like absolutely fed and can just pop off and start bopping people's heads with his ultimate. Darius is already one of those solo queue picks that you pick top lane, and you if you do well with him, you're going to start killing people. So this makes him a little bit more beefy in team fights. It also means just like, landing your Q when you've got a couple of levels up is going to be insane for him. So I think Darius has always been a good solo queue pick, and he's going to continue to have really good matchups in the top lane, and I think he's just now going to have a bit more prowess in teamfight situations. But don't think it like massively changes his position in the meta. Most people pick Darius in solo queue into melee matchups because Darius generally kind of hard smurfs melee matchups, and I think this is just going to make him a bit better. Echo. Base stats, attack damage gone up, phase dive, mana decreased. It's a nice change. It's not going to like make Echo suddenly meta, but it is for you Echo mains a nice change. Also makes him more relevant with Sheen, of course, like they said. Basically reducing the mana means you can get a bit more of a free hit off with phase dive if you're going to go for the aggressive Sheen / Lichbane plays, and you kind of aren't punished with the mana consumption in the late game. Hecarim. 5%, that's like a 50% nerf to his bonus damage, and the devastating charge damage has been nerfed significantly in the late game, or at least when you level it up. That's pretty beefy. I mean, Hecarim was definitely pretty strong, and this specifically here, his rampage damage stacking up to 5% per stack without changing the number of stacks that you can get is essentially a 50% nerf to his overall base damage, overall bonus damage, which is actually a pretty significant nerf when you think about it. Whether that will make him not meta in the top lane, I mean, Hecarim's always going to be like kind of meta in the jungle. The devastating charge nerfs are definitely going to hit his burst potential, which is one of the main strengths of Hecarim. But 40 damage, when you're building a bit of AD, shouldn't be too much in the grand scheme of things. But the 5% per stack is actually a pretty significant buff to his rampage bonus damage, and I'm interested to see whether that'll keep him relevant in the top lane. I think it will. I think he will still be relevant in the top lane. He might not just be as dominant as he was. Jarvan, he's getting some solid nerfs across the board. Base health by 1.2. Ooh, mana by 2.3. They're basically just wanting to round these off to round figures, to be honest. And mana regen also going down ever so slightly. The biggest nerf is his E cooldown, so you have to wait a little bit longer for the Demacian standard, so that's the EQ combo. But also the Golden Aegis, nerfed across the board. So even when you level it up, that Golden Aegis is going to be worse than it was at level 1 previously, which is insane. That's actually just such a big nerf. He's going to have half the shield in the late game, which is going to make him much, much less tanky in teamfight situations. Like less tanky than his level 1 Aegis was in the previous iteration of it. So like teamfight Jarvan, especially if you relied on the Golden Aegis in the late game as a full AD Jarvan to give you a little bit of survivability, you're going to get hit pretty hard here. And that is quite a significant change to the overall shielding that he can generate, because that's a 50% nerf on the shielding that he can generate in the late game. 50%, that's 50% less shield. Now, his Golden Aegis never gave him a huge amount of shield, realistically, but 50% nerf to the shield that you can get in the late game is actually pretty significant. Okay, interesting that they've basically moved his bonus resistances onto his ultimate. I think this is likely going to buff most Kennen players, to be honest, because E was usually your last pick in terms of leveling potential when leveling overall. Now you're going to put that bonus magic resistant armor on Slicing Maelstrom. It's going to make Kennen much more tanky in teamfight situations. Most Kennens are actually going to benefit from this change, like most Kennens in general. Also, Slicing Maelstrom generally lasts about the same time as Lightning Rush, and also you Lightning Rush to get into position a lot of the time for your Slicing Maelstrom. So putting those resistances on Slicing Maelstrom, the only change that kind of will be a bit annoying is that Zhonya's will eat into this time. So if you're slicing Maelstroming and then using Zhonya's, this will eat into the time that you've got those bonus resistances for, which can be a bit of a nuisance. However, it might make him less reliant on those Zhonya's in general. I still think Zhonya's is going to be a core item for AP cannons, but if you don't have Zhonya's, now you're getting a bit of bonus resistances to keep yourself tankier during that ultimate phase, which is interesting. I definitely think it means that Kennen will be a bit better overall, especially for those people that don't play Emax Kennen, which was an interesting build in the first place. So I'd say a minor buff to Kennen mains, but you remember that when you use these Zhonya's, you're not going to make use of those bonus resistances anyway. So that's the only thing to be concerned with when moving those resistances over to his ultimate. Rift Scuttler changes, which we'll talk about in a minute. Ring of Frost damage is up because we've had some Aftershock changes. That means, and in the Aftershock changes I will talk about, but they kind of massively affect like these Aftershock mid laners. So they're giving Lissandra a bit more damage coming out from her Ring of Frost, which means that, similar kind of range to Aftershock anyway. You're just going to try and front load some of the damage onto her W. Maokai, slight damage buff to his Q. I don't think it's relevant enough to make Maokai any good. He's still the lowest win rate top laner, by the way, which is sad because I used to love Maokai. Morgana, they are increasing the cooldown on her Black Shield across all stages of the game, and the shield strength is also being nerfed pretty significantly. Again, Morgana, it's an interesting one. Whether this changes any breakpoints with Thresh, for instance, being able to walk up and flay, then basic attack the Black Shield off, we'll see. But a lot of situations you were using it to block a piece of CC that wasn't really directly hugely damaging. Black Shield still is one of the most unique abilities in the game, so Morgana's still going to have her place in those matchups in the bot lane where you just don't want your AD carry to get caught, like Blitzcrank, Thresh, Pike, for instance, blah, 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 blah. Anything where you want to keep your AD carry safe from a specific catching ability, then Morgana's still going to have her relevance there. Rek'Sai getting nerfed across the board. She was pretty strong. Prey Seeker cooldown is up across the board. Furious Bite base damage and also Empowered True damage is down, as well as her scaling attack damage and her base attack damage, which is interesting. I think Rek'Sai was super strong. I don't know if this is a significant enough set of changes to make Rek'Sai worse. I mean, obviously makes her worse, but like completely out of meta. I mean, Jarvan and Rek'Sai have both had pretty solid changes here. But they are both still quite active junglers. But I do want to talk about the Rift Herald, the Rift Scuttler changes, because this is probably going to be more impactful than any of these jungle changes, regardless. I mean, the Prey Seeker changes in the late game up to 10 seconds is pretty annoying, and the fact that the attack growth scaling is down. But you've got 18 levels in League of Legends. It's the difference between. I need to get a calculator out. I can't do 3.35 times 18 because I'm terrible at maths. Well, I'm not terrible at maths, but it's early in it. So you'd get 60 attack damage base regardless, compared to 54. So it's like the relevance of 6 attack damage across all of the levels, which really isn't that big of a deal. The Furious Bite base damage nerf by 10 and 5. I mean, I think Rek'Sai's still going to see play. She's still going to be a great jungler. Shaco, Jack in the Box. They don't activate when scanned, which is a nice quality of life change for Shaco. Shaco mains rejoice. Shaco mains are still Shaco mains. We're buffing Shen's attack speed scaling, which is interesting because not many people, or attack speed ratio. That's interesting because he's going to get slightly increased attack speed across the board then. And he's also going to get a slight bit of buff to his Shadow Dash scaling, which is, I mean, these are minor buffs at the end of the day. And it really only helps tank Shen out for the most part. But these are super minor buffs. Shen was already okay in the top lane, and I don't think this is going to massively boost his win rate by a significant margin. It's like a 0.03 on his bonus health rate, scaling. Ooh, a lot of base damage going back to Kingslayer, especially in the late game. Hello, Silas. That's not a bad increase to his base damage. Like 30 is all right. So a base damage changes, I'm always really reluctant because the scaling in League of Legends is so high that, when it gets to late game, 30 damage feels kind of irrelevant. But, I think this is enough to make Silas okay again, genuinely. So have a look at Volibear. He has got bonus attack speed per stack up to 25. Volibear is annoying. Volibear is one of those niche top lane and jungle picks. Frenzy in general, this is mainly going to affect his top lane matchups. It might increase his Clear speed in the jungle are a bit better as well. But yeah, Volibear's still one of those niche picks. I mean, he's still just a bear that runs at you. I mean, I don't think this massively changes anything. Just might make him more obnoxious in the top lane. I mean, Volibear is just an obnoxious top laner, so... the Volibear's kit is going to prevent him from being super meta, but those Volibear top laners, those Volibear one-trick top laners, you know the ones I'm talking about, they're definitely going to like this change, because you're going to get, overall 15% more attack speed at max stacks, max level, and even at level 1, you're getting 15% more attack speed across the board. So you're going to get 15% more attack speed even from the very early levels, which is actually a pretty significant amount of attack speed to get super early on. Hunter's Potion removed. I don't know many people that upgraded to Hunter's Potion, if I'm completely honest. So yeah, I don't think that's a bad change. 10 base damage on Mana Immune going down. That's a small change, but enough because Ezreal's were definitely getting annoying. Ashe has had a VX. I'm going to move through the VFX updates because I think there are some changes here, like with the Grandmaster's Might. You're going to get like a couple of indicators that will be more easy to see. And added an indicator for the stun range, so people who are not like super hardcore Jax mains will know. But feel free to read through these in your own time. I don't think many of these VFX changes are going to be that crazy. Aftershock. It's basically they are moving power off Aftershock and putting it on, or base power off Aftershock and putting it onto tankier stats. So they've changed it to 70 at all levels in terms of bonus armor, but you get the scaling based on your bonus armor and also based on level. So you're going to get slightly increased based on level, which is going to be essentially you can get an extra bonus 80 or 150 based on the armor that you've already got. And then the same for magic resistance. They're also removing the damage scaling from attack damage and ability power and putting it solely onto maximum health. So basically they're saying Aftershock is for tanks. If you want to use it in the mid lane, there are clear kind of build paths that you're going to have to take. Like you're going to need a Zhonya's, for instance, to get the bonus armor to make it worth it into AD matchups. But they're basically moving the damage off of the ability to scale from AP, and they're putting it onto maximum health alone. Now, whether your maximum health in terms of base health is going to be relevant enough here, I don't think it will. They're essentially saying there are clear trade-offs. If you want to go for Aftershock mages in the mid lane because you're in a bad matchup, you're not going to get the damage for it as well. It is a defensive option. And they're trying to put Aftershock kind of more back onto tanks and give the scaling over to tanks as well, so you get more damage out of it. This is going to be great for those Aftershock users like Thresh. Thresh is going to love this. Aftershock users in the top lane that might want to use this, great. You've got a lot of extra. You've got a lot of extra stuff in your kit now that's going to help you scale the Aftershock up. But it's not going to be as good for mid laners now, which is why they've changed it. Minor rune tuning, bone plating. I mean, these are all kind of, I don't think anything, I read through them, not anything super significant coming through here, but this is one of the biggest changes coming through. Rift Scuttler. Rift Scuttler no longer spawns at 2 minutes, it spawns at 3 minutes 15. What this is going to do is significantly alter jungle pathing. This will significantly alter jungle pathing. A lot of people sometimes went first starting buff camp Scuttler. Some people went starting buff opposite Scuttler. Some people literally went starting buff then waited for Scuttler to spawn. So essentially, if you've got an early clear speed that is quick, so people like Olaf, who with Undertow can get through camps pretty quickly, they're going to be able to get probably up to an entire side clear before then going to Rift Scuttler. Then if you're a slow clear jungler, you might actually be at a point where you have to take one camp, you can take another camp, maybe you go blue Gromp, and then you might even have to be then making the decision between waiting around for Rift Scuttler spawn or waiting around or trying to do wolves and missing the start of Rift Scuttler spawn. And if the enemy has got vision and knowledge of where you started, you might end up losing Rift Scuttler. So I think this is going to benefit fast early clearers because they're going to be able to make more use of that time before the Rift Scuttler spawns. And also, if we get to a point where there are breakpoints in levels when this Rift Scuttler does spawn, like for instance, if you clear a few camps, you hit level 3 before the enemy is really only sort of trying to get towards level 3, then I genuinely think we could see some crazy changes in terms of the way that the jungler meta shapes up. But this is definitely going to affect people who like to go buff, camp, Rift Scuttler, invade. They're going to have to invade, then come to Rift Scuttler afterwards. So you're not going to be able to get that Rift Scuttler in directly into an invade. It might actually benefit people who want to be more aggressive in the early jungle, because the Rift Scuttler is no longer a priority for them, and they're no longer worried about losing it. It also means that you're actually going to lose a lot of that early interaction around Rift Scuttler. And especially for those of the people that like to contest it at 2 minutes, those level 2 junglers that used to like taking the level 2 fights, they might find that they don't find as many opportunities in those first few minutes. It's definitely going to significantly change the way that the jungle pathing takes place in the early game, at least. So I think this is going to be a really interesting change, and it also does take a little bit of pressure off the level 2 laners that need to come help take Rift Scuttler. They'll be level 3, I guess, by the point they get to level to 315. So interesting changes, very, very interesting changes here. I'm really interested to see how that affects early jungle pathing in total, because, you know, you've got an extra minute and 15 now. That's probably 2 camps for quick jungle clears. You might be getting 3 camps total on a slower jungle clear before 315. So yeah, this is super interesting. There definitely needs to be a lot of testing done on this, but it is probably one of the bigger changes in this update, because it really changes the way that the early jungle is going to be pathed and played. So those are my thoughts. Just starting to do a bit more League of Legends stuff, like I said, because I'm playing it a bit more and also doing a lot of casting for it. It's going to help me keep my thoughts quite level when I'm sort of approaching the game. If you guys play League of Legends and you play on EU West, let me know. You can add me, Excoundrel. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy. And if you don't play League of Legends, try it out. It's basically like a PC version of Vainglory. So I'm taking a break from Vainglory as well, by the way, guys. I haven't played it in quite a while. I've just had so many other games to do because of esports, and because of my job and Vainglory esports no longer existing, it's kind of not worth my time to put like a huge amount of effort into Vainglory, simply because like I just have other games I need to focus on for the sake of my career. I can't spend all this time focusing on Vainglory when I've got the likes of Clash Royale, League of Legends, CNC Rivals to an extent. I've even got Apex Legends that I'm trying to work on as well. So I just can't find time for Vainglory right now. I do still love the game, just I need a bit of a break while I kind of sort my other priorities out. And when I have a bit of downtime away from my job, I'll probably start doing some more Vainglory again. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.